In 1975, the communist revolutionary group, the Khmer Rouge, led by Pol Pot, had taken over Phnom Penh, the capital city of Cambodia, and soon they had control of the entire country and declared its new name as Democratic Kampuchea. They wanted to create an idealized communist agrarian society and started making radical changes. While their reign was short, the group was ousted by the Vietnamese government in 1979, they proved just how much damage can be done in just 4 short years. While we'll never know the exact number, most estimates put the amount of civilians killed by Pol Pot and his regime during their time in power at around 2 million people, or close to 25% of the population at the time. While the Cambodian genocide is hardly ever talked about in the West, those who survived it have definitely not forgotten. Number 10. Under Pol Pot, you had no right to private property. The government owned it all. One of the first things Pol Pot did is decide that his government would be truly, ideally socialist, which means absolutely no personal property at all. Under Pol Pot, all personal property was seized, and anything like clothes or other things you needed to live were still chosen by and considered property of the government. The truth is that this was extreme even for a communist society, and many other communist nations were watching this with concern. Pol Pot wanted to take total control of people's lives and absolutely own all the population in pretty much every way. Part of the point of communism was to give everyone at least the illusion that they were equal and they were being taken care of according to their needs, as long as they worked. Even most communist societies tended to allow people a certain amount of personal property to feel that they have something to aspire to, so Pol Pot was being extremely radical in this regard. Number 9. Most fun things were outlawed. You could not gamble, own jewelry, or be religious. Religion was of course quite dangerous for a regime like Pol Pot's if it wanted to survive, so it was one of the first things that had to go. The Khmer Rouge immediately banned the practice of religion and slaughtered a massive number of Buddhist monks. Some people believe that the amount killed may have been in the tens of thousands, but like many of the numbers regarding the Cambodian genocide, we'll likely never know for sure. On top of religion, most fun was also outlawed. Since you couldn't own property, you certainly couldn't wear gaudy things like jewelry, and gambling was also outlawed. Many traditional folk entertainment practices, they were also banned because Pol Pot wanted to separate people from their old culture. People were now spending the vast majority of their time working for the government, and they barely even got enough food to live. Number 8. Doctors, civil servants, and other dangerous people were detained or murdered. Pol Pot was himself a teacher before he became a revolutionary leader and a brutal dictator, and so he felt that the most dangerous type of people were those intellectuals who could be subversive and turn people against him. For that reason, he decided that anyone decently educated or smart was too dangerous to live, and the vast majority of the country's best and brightest were rounded up and murdered. Doctors, civil servants, teachers, policemen, and other important people, they were gunned down for the danger that they posed to his new regime. This particular communist movement was unique in that it was truly anti-intellectual. While communist regimes certainly repress intellectuals who argue with them, many others throughout history tend to bring as many intellectuals into their own fold as possible and use them for their own propaganda. Instead, Pol Pot seemed completely uninterested in propaganda and instead just wanted to do it all by brute force, and to do it all at once. Number 7. Pol Pot had his own infamous detention center, S21, but he did have way more than that. When Pol Pot and his team finally took over, they declared it Year Zero in the Cambodian calendar. This was a callback to the French Revolution, and immediately they went on a rampage of mass detention, torture, interrogation, and execution. Some estimates put the number of total detention centers at 150, and some put it as closer to 200, but it's hard to know the exact amount as most of the country became temporary detention centers. High schools and other public buildings were turned into prisons instead of places of learning. After all, you don't need a high school when the teachers have been murdered. The most infamous of these is a building that had once been a high school called Chol Sve Pre, but it was renamed to S21 by the Khmer Rouge. An estimated 14,000 people were detained at this facility, and only 7 are believed to have survived it. We know these things because the Khmer Rouge authorities made the torturers keep incredibly detailed photographic records to prove that they were carrying out the cruelties that they had been ordered to perpetrate. One photo shows someone who is only a boy wearing no shirt with a prisoner tag literally safety pinned directly to his chest, and his skin is covered in bruises. Number 6. People were forced out of their homes to work in rural areas, and schools were closed. Pol Pot grew up in relative privilege to a wealthy farm owner, and he got to go to study in France, which a lot of young men in Cambodia could not afford to do. For this reason, as we mentioned earlier, he spent time as a teacher before he became the cruel murderer we all know of today. He was also mild-mannered and seemed to be a kind person in all appearances before the genocide. Perhaps it was his love for farms that caused him to come up with such a strange idea, but Pol Pot decided to do something even most communist countries would consider extreme, and that was shut down the urban areas entirely. Everyone was forced out of the cities and sent to work in rural areas on farms or farming cooperatives. This was all rigidly enforced by the Khmer Rouge soldiers, who made sure that the entire country turned into an agrarian society practically overnight. The purity and importance of farming and rural life were emphasized above all else, and learning and intellectualism was simply a thing of the past. With all the teachers murdered and the schools turned into detention centers, school was done. The only thing the Khmer Rouge wanted to teach was farming and obedience. Number 5. Pol Pot created a new social hierarchy and strictly enforced it. In order to create an entirely new agrarian society overnight, Pol Pot decided that he needed to completely change the social order. He made 4 new categories of people in order to class his new population of worker slaves. Those who were aligned with Western values or happened to live in the city, they were the new people, and they had a lot less rights than most. However, if you were loyal to the Khmer Rouge, maybe you could move up to deportee status. Those who really behaved may eventually be considered candidates for full citizenship, and if you really were a good little government stooge, you may eventually end up a full-right citizen. However, most people stayed at the status that the Khmer Rouge put them into when they first classified them. It was extremely rare for people to move up in society. This is partly because the entire new hierarchy was meant to glorify and elevate an existing category of people above others, and systems were designed to discriminate and not be fair. Number 4. Families were forcibly and entirely separated to better brainwash the populace. One of the biggest hallmarks of Pol Pot's regime was a family separation policy that even many of the worst dictators in history would have thought cruel. When the people were forced out of the cities to go be workers in the country, the Khmer Rouge separated families en masse. Unlike many dictators of the past who have done such things in order to punish others for subversion, Pol Pot did it as a calculated move to make his regime into the perfectly well-oiled machine. There were a couple of big reasons for Pol Pot's cruel policy. For starters, it makes it a lot easier to brainwash the populace when you remove the family unit. The government now essentially becomes the family authority that raises the children. However, Pol Pot also wanted to organize people based on their skills and uses as efficiently as possible, which meant grouping children with other similar children, and women with other similar women, and so on. And this also meant sending people away to areas where he felt they would make the most sense as workers, so it was a natural byproduct of his policies, even regardless of the brainwashing reasons. Even the worst of the other communist regimes were not this cruel unless actual counter-revolutionary crimes had been committed against the regime. Number 3. Pol Pot literally pitted the purer country folk against the city intellectuals. Pol Pot was an intellectual himself, so perhaps this is why he felt so threatened, or perhaps he really was just into the idea of farm life. Regardless, the true hallmark of the strangeness of Pol Pot's cruel regime was his insistence on an entirely agrarian society, starting over entirely from the beginning. Even when countries are taken over by revolutionaries, they tend not to throw out the entire thing in terms of infrastructure, knowledge, and urban build-up, but the Khmer Rouge led by Pol Pot, well, they did just that. He essentially made the entire thing a battle of the dangerous and subversive city intellectuals versus the more pure folk who worked on farms. The irony here is that while Pol Pot felt that farm life and an agrarian society would make things more pure and wholesome, or at least so he claimed on the surface, in his supposed quest for moral purity, he was responsible for the deaths of roughly 2 million innocent people. Unfortunately, this is a dangerous sentiment playing out in too many places in the world today, as hatred for intellectualism is on the rise. Number 2. Some were more equal than others despite claims of perfect communism. While Pol Pot and his regime claimed that they were creating an ideal and perfectly equal communist society, most of us know that that sort of thing rarely works out so well in practice. As we mentioned earlier, there were 4 classes of people, and even a lot of hard work and sucking up generally didn't get you any further. Worse yet, if you happened to live in the city when he took over, you were a new person, while anyone who lived on a farm was already a full-right citizen. To make matters worse, even if you lived on a farm, that didn't necessarily mean that you had enough to eat during the reign of the Khmer Rouge, Rouge, and it certainly didn't mean that things were equal among that class. There are reports that soldiers who worked for the Khmer Rouge and anyone who administered for them certainly seemed to have more luxury than most people living under the new regime of democratic Kampuchea. As for Pol Pot himself, many people like to point out that despite his claims about the importance of hard farm work and everyone being equal, he always looked fresh-faced and soft-handed, like he hadn't worked physically hard in a very long time, if ever. Number 1. Pol Pot's Cambodia was an attempt at rapid social engineering. There are successful communist countries running today and successful capitalist countries as well as types in between. There isn't really one perfect form of government, and any type of government can at least do decent by its people if it tries hard enough. This is why many other communist countries were alarmed from the very beginning. Communism in many cases came about more naturally because people were looking for something different that took a little better care of the common man, and the communist countries, they never took such drastic steps. Many communist intellectuals feared from the beginning that Pol Pot's regime could never work long term, and it was more of an embarrassment to them than anything else. He wanted to turn his society into a level of communism that many would consider extreme and go entirely agrarian basically overnight. And unlike most countries, he murdered his intellectuals instead of trying to subvert them to right things in favor of the government. His rapid style was so insane that many communist countries urged Vietnam, their closest neighbor, to put an end to this reign of terror. So, in 1978, at the urging of the international community, Vietnam invaded Cambodia. In 1979, they took over Phnom Penh, and the remaining forces of the Khmer Rouge, as well as Pol Pot himself, retreated into the jungles. Pol Pot would never face justice. He committed suicide the night he found out that he would be turned over to an international tribunal, but at least the invasion of the Vietnamese provided some immediate welcome relief from the horrific cruelties that the Cambodian people were suffering. So I'm not going to ask if you enjoyed that video, but I do hope you found it interesting, maybe illuminated a bit of history that you weren't so familiar about. If you did, please do give us a like below, and don't forget to subscribe. Also, if you're looking for something else, we've got a biographics video, which is another channel I do, all about Pol Pot. I'm going to link to that on the screen now, so go over to that channel, check it out, and why not subscribe. And as always, thank you for watching.